Mr. President, I rise today in support of Goodwin Liu's nomination to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Years ago, in the early 1990s, when I was working for the National I Have a Dream Foundation, I first crossed paths with Goodwin Liu, who was then a senior program officer with the Corporation for National Service. An issue had arisen with regard to the corporation's support of one of our foundation's programs. We were running an AmeriCorps program. And Mr. Liu very quickly distinguished himself through his competence and obvious commitment to education and national service. In fact, my interactions with him were so positive and memorable that 18 years later, when I had joined this body and heard of his nomination, I immediately remembered him and was anxious to find out what he'd been up to in the intervening years. The opportunity to reconnect with Goodwin Liu as part of his confirmation process has turned out to be one of the real pleasures of this job. It is readily apparent to me, as well as to so many senators on both sides of the aisle who have had the opportunity to meet with him, to question him, and to get to know him better, that Professor Goodwin Liu is a good, decent, bright, and engaging man. His career, in my view, is marked by a profound commitment to service. From his time working at the Corporation for National Service, the organization of our federal government that supports VISTA and AmeriCorps and all sorts of different commitments to national service across our country, to his later work as a clinical and summer associate while in law school, to his work for the Department of Education as a young attorney, to his service as a judicial clerk, and then his scholarship in support of opportunities for all Americans. Professor Liu has been guided by a desire to leave the world a better place than he found it. Despite these many positive personal qualities to recommend him, it is perhaps something of an understatement to say that Goodwin Liu's nomination has been controversial. First nominated in February of 2010, and then after a searching and difficult nomination hearing and a vote here, a renomination in January of this year, a second confirmation hearing in front of the Judiciary Committee in which I was able to participate, we now stand on the verge of a cloture vote required for us to even get to the consideration of his nomination. Professor Liu is a prolific scholar who has written on a wide range of topics relating to educational rights, civil rights, public schooling, among many others. And when in the nomination hearing I heard the many vigorous attacks and questions against Professor Liu, I was concerned, even shocked. The charges that were being levied against him, essentially that he is a radical who would use the bench to engage in aggressive judicial activism, are serious. And so I took it upon myself to meet with Professor Liu in person and to review his record and come to my own conclusions. I can say with confidence Professor Liu will be a first-rate judge in the finest traditions of the legal profession. Professor Liu knows the difference between being a law professor and a circuit court judge, the difference between lecturing and judging. He knows that the role of a judge is not to advocate, but to follow and obey the dictates of the Constitution and the precedents of our Supreme Court. Goodwin Liu will obey the law. We can and should ask no more of our nominees. If we take a step back from the current heated partisan rhetoric, I think we can find broad agreement across the aisle that a judicial candidate ought to be evaluated according to his legal ability and experience, his standing within the legal profession, his integrity, and his temperament. Professor Liu rates extraordinarily highly in all of these areas. His academic and professional qualifications demonstrate he is a lawyer of the utmost ability with a broad range of experience. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He got his law degree from Yale University, where he was the editor of the Yale Law Journal. He clerked for one of the great intellects of the D.C. Circuit, Judge David Tittel, and after that clerked for Justice Ginsburg on the United States Supreme Court. Since that time, he's worked in private practice and has gone on to earn a tenured professorship at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. At Berkeley, he's been a prolific scholar of exceptionally high regard. In addition to this sterling resume, Professor Liu enjoys the highest esteem of his legal colleagues. Noted conservative scholar and a classmate of mine, John Yoo, has in fact spoken in support of Professor Liu's nomination, as has Kenneth Starr. Professor Liu is the recipient of the University of California's highest teaching award, and Clint Bollock, director of the Goldwater Institute, has said that Professor Liu's writings, quote, exhibit fresh, independent thinking and intellectual honesty, end quote. This high opinion of Professor Liu is broadly shared. In giving Professor Liu its highest rating of unanimously well qualified, the American Bar Association interviewed scores of attorneys and judges who have worked with him and found his reputation to be one of impartiality, integrity, and great ability. For the nominees to our circuit courts of appeal, we could ask no less. Professor Liu's activity as a noted legal and policy scholar is, in my view, being used unfairly to impugn his judicial temperament. In meeting personally with Goodwin Liu, he explained to me that he clearly understands and respects the difference between scholarship and jurisprudence. Academics explore the contours and limits of the law, often advocating for specific policy outcomes. That is the work of a great law professor. Judges, on the other hand, apply legal precedent to come to the conclusion that the law compels, without prejudice or pursuit of a personal agenda. When Professor Liu has been asked to apply the law as would a judge, any criticism that he allows a policy preference to cloud his judgment just does not pass muster. As an example, although Professor Liu has said that his personal views are that individuals should be treated equally regardless of sexual orientation, he testified before the California State Senate in 2008 that California's controversial Proposition 8, which bans same-sex marriages, in Professor Liu's testimony and in his view, would pass muster under the California Constitution. This is a simple and concrete example from well before his nomination to the Circuit Court that Professor Liu is fully capable and willing to set aside his personal preferences and views when called upon to render an important legal judgment. I also examined Professor Liu's scholarship on the topics of education and welfare, from which his opponents claim he would create a constitutional right if confirmed to the bench. I would be concerned if these charges had merit, but they don't. Rather, they reflect a distortion of what he's actually written. Professor Liu has repeatedly clarified, both in my presence, in the nomination hearings, and in writing, his unexceptional belief that Congress, and not the courts, has the power to create new fundamental rights through the amendments to our Constitution. An objective review of Professor Liu's qualifications, temperament, and intellect lead to the conclusion he's an outstanding nominee and should be confirmed to the bench. Former Representative Tom Campbell, a 5-term Republican member of the House, agrees. In urging his swift confirmation, Representative Campbell specifically praised Professor Liu's reputation for integrity, fair-mindedness, and collegiality. I call upon my colleagues to take a fresh look at Professor Liu and come to their own conclusions about him. In my opinion, he's a dedicated public servant who's undergone intense scrutiny over the past 15 months at great personal sacrifice. Too often, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that judicial and executive nominees are also people with families, careers, and other responsibilities. The confirmation process can exact a steep cost, and as a result, too many qualified and decent individuals either withdraw from or decline to submit to it in the first place. Professor Liu, in my view, is an exceptional nominee to the Circuit Court. He's borne the challenges of this confirmation process with grace and dignity, as is in keeping with his character and his dedication to public service. In voting on the petition to invoke cloture, I urge my colleagues to consider the content of Professor Liu's character. Listen to those who know him, have met with him, have questioned him, above the interest groups who have sensationalized this nomination. I ask my colleagues to consider the bipartisan support from those who've worked with him and who know him best. I know Goodwin Liu. I trust him, and I believe he will make an excellent judge. And I urge my colleagues to consider and support his confirmation.